Today, we're going to dig into something critical, those predictable market patterns that pop up whenever the risk of a major conflict starts to rise. We're going to show you how to read the financial playbook, sometimes before the first page is even turned.
So let's start with a heavy question, but it's one the markets are asking right now. The movements we're seeing in certain sectors, well, they feel eerily similar to the months right before February 24th, 2022. It really makes you wonder, are we watching the prelude to a sequel?
Now, let's be absolutely crystal clear. This analysis isn't about predicting war. We don't have a crystal ball. What this is about is understanding how capital flows. We're here to give you a framework, a new lens to look through, so you can recognize the patterns when they start to emerge.
Okay, so let's dive right in. The place that has analysts and military strategists on high alert these days is a little strip of land called the Suwalki Gap. Let's break down exactly what that is and, more importantly, why it matters so much.
So what you're looking at is this incredibly narrow land corridor. Think about it. On one side, you've got the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and their only land connection to the rest of their NATO allies. On the other side, Belarus and the heavily militarized Russian territory of Kaliningrad. It's a geographic bottleneck, and it has absolutely immense strategic implications.
So why on earth does the financial world care so much about this little strip of land? Well, because it's a known vulnerability. It's an essential piece in pretty much every NATO defense scenario. Any hostile move here isn't ambiguous. It would mean a direct, full-blown response from the entire alliance. And here's the kicker for investors. Markets don't wait for the first shot, not even close. They react to things like troop movements, political rhetoric, and budget shifts long before a conflict actually starts.
And that's exactly why. To understand what markets might be thinking about the Suwalki Gap today, we have to look back. The lead-up to the 2022 invasion of Ukraine gives us the clearest playbook we have. It's a perfect case study for what happens when the probability of war starts to climb.
Just look at this timeline. It's so revealing. The invasion itself was on February 24th, right? But the market's reaction began a full year earlier. First, you see this slow creep in energy prices. Then, 6 months out, defense stocks start to move. By the time the invasion was front-page news, the so-called smart money, we're talking large institutional investors, they had already moved their pieces on the board. They were acting on probability, not the event itself.
And this is the core idea you have to grasp. Big money, massive pools of capital, just can't afford the luxury of waiting for 100% certainty. It moves based on risk, on geopolitical tea leaves, on the rising probability of something happening. By the time the news breaks for everyone else, the big moves have already been made.
Okay, so if all this capital is moving early, where is it going? Let's follow the money and break down the key sectors that basically become magnets for investment when things start getting tense.
You can think of them as the three first responders. First up, obviously, is defense. Governments start approving bigger budgets and signing these huge multi-year contracts. That's guaranteed demand. Second is energy. The mere risk to supply chains for oil, gas, and LNG is enough to send prices soaring. And third, and people sometimes forget this one, is raw materials and infrastructure. War means destruction, yeah, but it also means eventual rebuilding, which requires massive government spending on everything from steel to concrete.
And the data just speaks for itself. Look at this. In the 6 months after the invasion started, the broad market was down about 15%. But the defense and energy sectors, they didn't just survive, they absolutely thrived. This isn't some random coincidence. It's the predictable result of that massive redistribution of capital we've been talking about.
You know, this really brings us from the mechanics of the market to the psychology of it all. Because at the end of the day, the market is just a giant collection of human decisions. And in a crisis, you really see two very, very different mindsets emerge.
So on the left, you've got the typical emotional roller coaster, right? Starts with denial, it'll never happen, then comes shock, how did this happen? Which leads directly to panic selling at the absolute worst time. And then, often, a late entry buying back in near the peak. But on the right, you have the rational model. It's about monitoring the situation, acting on probability, and focusing on resilience and discipline. This isn't about being cynical, not at all. It's simply about being prepared.
Let's just walk through what day X, the day of escalation, looks like. First, you get widespread panic. The market falls, and it falls hard. Then, emotional selling just takes over. People are rushing for the exits, locking in their losses. But here's the incredible paradox. For the investors who were prepared, whose portfolios were already positioned for this exact scenario, this chaotic moment is just confirmation. The worst moment for the crowd is actually the least painful.
So, let's put all these pieces together. How can we wrap this up into a framework for thinking? It's not about trying to predict the future with a crystal ball. It's about building a more resilient way of thinking about your assets in what is, let's face it, a pretty unstable world.
Now, I have to say, this is not specific financial advice, but it's a conceptual model. A resilient portfolio might have your core diversified holdings, sure. It would also have assets that act as a hedge against inflation. And crucially, it would include assets that don't depend on a peaceful, stable economy and may even benefit from instability and increased government spending, like we've seen in defense and energy.
And this really gets to the heart of it. From a human perspective, war is an absolute, undeniable tragedy. There's no debating that. But from a purely economic one, it's also a massive and, in many ways, predictable redistribution of capital. The key isn't to judge the morality of this flow, but to understand that it is going to happen.
Look, we all lived through February 24th, 2022. And while history never repeats itself perfectly, the behavior of markets, how they react to fear, to risk, to uncertainty, that pattern is incredibly consistent. And understanding that pattern, well, that's the first step to navigating whatever comes next.